I got caught in this torrential rain as I came in. I mean, it never rains in England, so I'm completely unused to this.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if you had a hairdryer that you could use?
Now, funny you should say that, but actually we put 3 hair dryers on me as I came into the shop here. And it worked very well. It was a very good advert.
James Dyson, good morning. You are joining us from the Dyson showroom in New York. Welcome to Masters of Scale.
Good morning. Good to see you. Sorry about the rain, but...
I'm glad if you were going to get caught in a torrential downpour that you've got hair dryers to dry you off.
It took 3 of them to dry me, which is not a criticism of the hairdryer. It's just I was very wet.
Well, we're super happy to have you here, and there's so much to cover, and we only have so much time. And I'm really curious, especially as a father of an artist, how it is that you, as a prodigiously talented young artist, someone who's encouraged to pursue art, ended up becoming an inventor. What happened that turned you from that one direction to the other?
Well, it was the principal of my first art college saw me painting and drawing, and I suspect decided the world didn't need me as a painter, and he suggested a design. This is the 1965. I'd never heard of the word design. Design wasn't talked about. There wasn't good design in shops. There weren't design museums. So I said, "What's design?" And he said, "Oh, well, you can design furniture, glass, ceramics." And I said, "I'll do furniture because I've sat on chairs." So I went to the Royal College of Art and Design to design furniture. And when I was there, I discovered the architecture department and thought that looked more interesting. I mean, more interesting for me. I mean, furniture is really interesting, but the scale of architecture and the complexity of architecture really interested me. And while I was doing architecture, we had a rather brilliant structural engineer talking about structures. And I suddenly realized that I loved engineering. I'd never been exposed to it. I'd done Latin, Greek, and ancient history at school. My parents were both school teachers. I went to art school and suddenly discovered that I loved engineering. And also I realized that, historically in architecture had been about concrete and bricks. But in the 60s, with Fry Otto and Buckminster Fuller, the wonderful American inventor and architect, that now the engineering would be the thing that mattered. Buildings would change because of engineering. So I started doing that and then got interested in product engineering, actually in designing a high-speed landing craft.
When you made that turn into engineering, you were working on such an incredible range of projects, something called a sea truck, a better wheelbarrow. How is it that you came to decide that you were going to develop a better vacuum cleaner of all things?
Oh, frustration. I had I think it was called a Hoover Junior, which was typical of a vacuum cleaner of that era, which had a bag. And I was vacuuming one day and it wasn't picking up. And I thought, why isn't it picking up? Perhaps it needs a new bag. It didn't have a new bag. I went out and emptied the old bag out because it was full. And the little light said it was full. I sealed it back up again, put it back in the machine, and still no suction. I thought that's odd. And I suddenly twigged that the pores of the bag were clogged. And all the airflow has to go through the bag. The pores of the bag were clogged. The bag was empty, but the pores in the bag were clogged. And it's the pores of the bag that result in it being a filter. So I realized how frustrating this was because the first dust that goes into the bag goes straight to those pores and blocks them. So I looked around for something that would solve this problem, a filter which didn't clog.
And like so many inventions, it came from your own need, your own desire for something better. But it took you, as I've read, something like 5,000 prototypes in 4 years to arrive on your final design. Can you help us understand what lessons you learned in that process and why it took so much iteration to get to something that you felt was right?
Well, firstly, it was before the age of computers, so I had to do everything empirically. And when you develop something, you only make one change at a time. It's not a question of brilliance. Oh, I wonder if this complete thing would work. A, it doesn't, and B, you don't know why it doesn't work. So what you do is you start off with your basic idea, in my case, a cyclone, which separates dust by centrifugal force. You typically see them outside factories and cement works and so on, as a means of, and sawmills, as a means of collecting very fine dust. But I was doing it on a miniature scale. I've seen huge ones, but I was doing it on a miniature scale. So what I was doing was making one little change at a time. It's very painstaking, and it sounds incredibly tedious. Actually, it's fascinating, discovering what works and what doesn't work. And during the process, I always like to say I had 5,126 failures over a period of 4 years. And then finally, the final one, the 5,127th, worked. It sounds tedious, and I came in covered with dust, and there were highs and there were lows. But it was just a fascinating time learning what would work.
And if it were 2024, you would have had computers helping you with the design. The process most likely would have been radically faster. And once you reach that prototype that was right, there are well-defined, easily researchable processes. You could go on Google, you could go on ChatGPT right now and understand, okay, do I want to go license this? Or what does it look like to start manufacturing this? And how can I do that? You could learn that in literally a handful of minutes. But, in the 1970s, we didn't even have a consumer internet. So what did you do when you got it, when you finally got it right? More than 5,000 efforts, more than 4 years. What did you do once you had it?
Well, I decided that I would rather be an engineer than a manufacturer, because I'd been a manufacturer. I'd manufactured high-speed landing craft and wheelbarrows and drip watering systems and a few other things. And I thought it'd be better if I concentrated on engineering. So I went off to try and license it to all sorts of people, including all my competitors, would-be competitors. They all had a good look at it, but none were interested in licensing it.
Why not?
You better ask them. But I suspect they didn't really want to change. I mean, it's quite a radical change if you're making vacuum cleaners with bags, suddenly to make a vacuum cleaner that doesn't need a bag, and you must explain that there's a problem with the bag. So it's a big volte-face for an existing manufacturer. So I do have some sympathy. But also it had become a very, very boring industry. They're all selling the same thing, same technology, and presumably making money, but didn't want to take a risk. So in the end, I decided that they just didn't want to take a risk. Therefore, it was a good idea to compete against them and do something completely different. So the interesting thing was my failure to, maybe I'm not a very good salesman, but my failure to license other companies who ought to license it taught me in the end, the penny dropped. Look, they don't want to change. They don't want to improve. They don't want to make a better product. They don't want to get rid of bags and the problems of bags. They're quite happy as they are. Therefore, I ought to set myself up and compete with them. I knew the whole process. So I decided to set myself up as a manufacturer from scratch to take on these big multinationals. I didn't have any money. I just had debt.
So did you raise money at that point, or you were just going into debt to do this?
Well, I discovered I was hopeless at raising money. I went to venture capitalists and the people I suppose who ought to have lent the money, but they wouldn't, because they said, we're not lending it to an engineer. So eventually I borrowed it from a clearing bank. And I just happened to have a wonderful manager of a clearing bank who appealed to the ombudsman at head office, and they finally agreed. I borrowed £600,000, so that's about $900,000, something like that.
Right, and that was in the 1970s. So
that was 1992 by then.
Oh, 92. I'm sorry, forgive me.
Yeah, but still a lot of money.
Quite a lot of money, which I take it you took on personally.
Yes, exactly. Putting my house up as collateral.
There's this myth of the lone entrepreneur, which often is a myth. It's a sort of a heroic image. As you were going through your prototyping process and then pitching it for licensing and then raising money, where did help come in? Where did you start partnering with people to support you in this process?
The only people who helped me initially was the bank manager. So after that point, I had to go and find people to make the components and to make the tooling. And, I had a good idea who those would be. Some I knew and some I didn't know. But I knew the process because I'd manufactured things before. I knew the basic process. I knew how to run a factory, start an assembly line. I knew who you needed to employ. But I didn't have any money. I hasten to say I didn't have any money at all.
You were saying self-deprecatingly, perhaps, that you're not very good at sales. When you say you knew how to hire people, or you knew the right people to hire, how did you think about functionally where to bring people in and when to bring them in, right? Because if you're taking on debt, you've got expensive manufacturing, you've got a supply chain you've got to manage, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many components to this. And you must have been very cost conscious, right? If you're dealing literally with borrowed money and you're personally liable for it. I'm curious just about how you made the decision, okay, I'm going to invest money to hire someone here or there, and when you did that.
Well, the best thing I did was to hire 3 graduate engineers. Business started with the 3 of us, or 4 of us actually, doing the drawings for all the components. And then we as engineers went out to the subcontractors, to the tool makers, and to people who might assemble the product for us. As it happens, we couldn't find anyone to assemble it. So we rented half a factory off the people who were doing the moldings for us, because they had a half-empty factory. So I said, can I rent the other half to do the assembly? So we didn't have to buy a factory. We had no production manager, no quality control person. It was just 4 of us engineers doing that. Then we had to hire someone to run the assembly line and, of course, people to assemble on the assembly line. But that's a relatively simple procedure. And then I had to hire a salesperson. And I'm not saying, when you start, it's very difficult to get people to join you because you're a startup. You're not, you're not up and running. You're not making money. And no one really believes in you. So when I approached the retailers, they weren't interested at all. They said, look, we're selling all the big brands in vacuum cleaners. Why on earth should we sell a Dyson that looks strange? And, why would they buy it? And of course, you can't say why they would buy it.
Why not?
Well, you can't prove it because you can't prove it'll sell. If you're a retailer giving over special space in your shop to this strange-looking product that no one's ever heard of, made by someone they've never heard of, why would they give over space in their shop to you?
Right.
Are you a reliable manufacturer?
Right.
So the reputation is on the line. I quite understand that. And funnily enough, the very first person to stock our product was a mail order catalogue. I mean, they're less popular now because Amazon and lots of other people have taken over. But in those days, if you wanted to order through the post, you did it through like the Sears catalogue. And at the end of a day trying to sell to the buyer from this catalogue, he said, exactly this question, why should I chuck out a well-known brand out of my catalogue and put in your thing? Very expensive, and nobody understands it. And who are you anyway? And I said, well, because your catalogue is boring. And he sort of looked at me for 5 minutes and said, okay, I'll give it a try. So sometimes desperation leads you to say something you shouldn't say, but causes someone to think.
Well, it was also honest. I mean, it's one principle in the modern day of consumer packaged goods is you take a walk down the aisle at CVS or Kroger's and you look at categories and you figure out where all the packaging looks the same and can you differentiate on packaging really alone. I mean, Liquid Death is a great example of this, right? It's water. It's water. There's no invention in this. It is entirely in the packaging and the marketing and the branding. And you really had both, right? You had a product that looked different, but also functioned differently. So I'm curious, were you also doing when you were going around trying to get buyers to place an order? Were you demonstrating the product? Were you splashing the floor with debris and demoing the Dyson against other brands?
Yes, I mean, I couldn't demonstrate it against other brands, but of course I showed the performance graph. I showed how other vacuums dropped off as you used them because of clogging the dust and how ours didn't. And I was able to demonstrate it. And in fact, the very first person who stocked it, we sell a dry powder carpet shampoo that you can use with it as opposed to wet shampooing carpets. And he said that won't work. So I went off to the local petrol station, gas filling station, and got some Ribena. It's black currant juice, concentrated black currant juice drink. I came back and threw it on his office carpet and then put the powder down and vacuumed it up, and it worked. So I demonstrated that. Yes, I mean, you have to demonstrate everything and prove everything. And sometimes buyers want to take the product home and use it themselves. in order to come back and be a champion of it.
Yeah, and your product was, if I remember correctly, priced higher than most of their vacuums on the market. So if I'm right about that, why do you think consumers were willing to place the bet on the Dyson?
Well, at the time, in the early 90s, there's great concentration on, if you went into retailers, on discounts. Everything was sold on discount and price. And I thought that was wrong. I think, that's... well, it's boring for a start. If all you're looking at is price rather than looking at specification and how things perform. And I think performance and durability, enjoyment of use, ease of use, not having to have consumables like bags and filters, I thought all that was important, although you couldn't see that by looking at the marketplace. So it was a matter of convincing the retailers that something different with different technology, which didn't require consumables, but was a bit more expensive, that people would actually buy it. And one of the problems in the early days was getting retailers to allow us to say next to our vacuum cleaner on the stand what the difference was, what the technology was all about. Because in those days, they just wanted people to buy on price. It's the easiest thing. So that was quite a big breakthrough, getting what we call point-of-sale display material onto the product. But that made a huge difference for us.
And as the product started to take off, I have to imagine that half of a manufacturing plant was not sufficient. How did you make the transition from small-scale to large-scale manufacturing? What had to happen for you to get there?
It's very painful. You keep having to move factory. You have to find more suppliers. Some suppliers don't want to make more product. You have to employ a lot more people to assemble the product. So you have all the aches and pains of growing and, recruiting more and more people and finding that maybe some people you recruited initially just couldn't cope with the scale. So it's a painful growing process. In the end, unfortunately, in England, we had very few suppliers. I think the only supplier we had in England, so we're bringing bits in from all over the world to assemble them in England, was someone who made the hose, the flexible hose that we used to use on the vacuum cleaner. But he didn't want to make any more. So he only wanted to make a certain amount because that would have meant recruiting, taking on another factory and recruiting more people, and he wasn't willing to do that. And I quite understand that. I mean, it is a big risk, and that was the point where we had to move production to somewhere where all the bits are made. So that was we had quite a big factory doing a lot of plastic molding and a lot of people working on the assembly lines, but it became totally impractical to go on making a product where we had no suppliers.
Starting as an artist and an engineer and an inventor, and now you are running a company that is trying to figure out supply chain, trying to figure out manufacturing, trying to figure out distribution, trying to figure out sales, marketing, et cetera. It feels like such a shift from artist and engineer inventor to entrepreneur and scaler of a company. What was that experience like for you? Did you enjoy it? Was it exasperating? How did you experience it?
It was all of those things. I mean, it had to be done. It is interesting. It is fascinating. Manufacturing is, a lot of people think it's very boring. It's a repetitive process. Actually, everything goes wrong every day. So it's a matter of solving problems all the time, whether it's a supplier who's not supplying or someone who's supplied something with bad quality, or you've got to move on to something, a new material or something. So there's always problems to solve and huge logistical problems. And it is fascinating. And I was able to recruit good people to help me and ultimately to run all that for me. But I learned it all on the way up.
And it feels like somewhere along the way, you realized and then made the decision that Dyson couldn't just be a vacuum company, that you had to expand into other product lines to scale, to become as big as you could to fulfill your potential. Could you share with us how you made that decision and then how you chose what directions to go in exploring new product lines?
Well, firstly, I wasn't really trying to get big. I would, in a way, have been quite happy making vacuum cleaners. It may sound strange, but I find them fascinating. No, I wanted to do other things. It wasn't that I felt I had to, because I didn't have to. You can have a very lovely, relatively simple business just making vacuum cleaners, but I wanted to do other things. And the other things I didn't do as part of a business plan. I did them because I had some technology that could make that product work better and solve some of the frustrations that people might have with that product. So that's how I approached it, and that's how I got into those areas. It wasn't a conscious decision, for example, to go into the beauty business. It's just that we had a particular motor, this tiny little motor, that size, which could replace this huge motor that you see, in hair dryers, and be quieter and more efficient and dry hair better. So it's always usually the technology that decides that we should go into a certain product area. It's not a business decision. I mean, you could say that's a stupid thing to do, but it's the way we are. We go where our technology takes us.
Well, and I imagine once you see the use of the technology and you are developing the product concept, you are in parallel at least looking at what the business opportunity might be, right? I mean, you're not going down the road of developing a Mars rover, for example, just because you have the technology for it if you don't think that there's a market for it. Is that
yes,
fair?
I don't think there's a particularly big market for that.
Right.
But for example, with hand dryers, we had no idea of the market size because it's quite a sort of concealed business. But we felt we had a much better hand dryer that used 700 watts instead of 3,000 watts and dried much quicker. So we thought it was a better product, but we didn't research the market to see how big it was. We just wanted to sell it because we thought it was a better hand dryer. So I say it's not a very commercial approach. That's the point I'm trying to make. We're not trying to get big. We're just doing products that we find interesting and fascinating and that solve problems.
And it's a really fascinating kind of theory of scale of let's use our technology to solve problems and then figure out, if there's a business there, because you've gotten big despite the lack of intent to do so. I'm curious about the jumping off point. Is it looking at the technology that you have, that much smaller motor, for example, and saying, how could we deploy it? Or is it you or others on the team saying, gosh, I hate my hair dryer? Or why can't I go to a restroom and dry my hands properly with one of the air dryers? And then the penny drops and someone says, oh, I think we might have the technology to do that. What's the sequence of that process like for you all?
The only occasion where we've really done that is with the electric car we developed. The industry thought that there would only 2% of cars by 2030 would be electric. And we decided that couldn't be right. Not that it would need legislation to do it, but rather people would want that. People would vote with their feet. And the industry wasn't taking any notice. And we made electric motors. We are developing new technology batteries, and we know quite a lot about air movement and air treatment. And that's pretty much a car. So we thought we would develop a car. So that's an example probably of what you've just said, that, the existing product wasn't satisfactory. It wasn't going to last because people were going to go electric. Not everybody, but more than 2% of people were going to go electric, and no one else is doing it. Probably that was a bad business decision.
Well, I mean, you canceled that project a few years ago, yeah?
Yes, for an interesting reason, actually, because indeed the industry weren't interested in making electric cars at all because it's a massive change for them. And the thing that really forced it was Dieselgate. Suddenly they realized that people didn't want to be polluted by diesel or petrol fumes. They wanted cars that didn't do that. And so all the existing manufacturers who are making these dreadful diesel engines had to change. They had to change, otherwise they were in deep trouble. And they are changing. But suddenly, from 2%, you're starting to see perhaps 100% in some countries. And they were able to switch to do an electric car because a car manufacturer is regulated by emissions across their fleet. So they can have gas guzzlers at one end if they've got an electric car on which they lose money at the other end. It allows them to make the cars on which they make money. But we're just, rather like Tesla, just making electric cars. But I don't have Tesla's type of money. The $30 billion or whatever it is, wonderful Tesla has. I don't have that. So we recognized that it would be a really long haul to make it profitable.
What was your internal process for deciding to, one, green light going after an electric car, and then two, deciding to kill it? Because that's a big investment, time, money, just to prototype it. And then there's a sunk cost there. And a lot of companies would be, kind of psychologically attached to that sunk cost, and would take much longer to kill it than you did. So can you help us understand the process of both, yes, we're going to go into this and explore it, and then no, we're not going to pursue it anymore?
Well, we were quite interested in having one big project, and a car certainly answered that question. And we developed it with huge enthusiasm. We were all very keen on it, and were passionate about it. But then we realized that as it started in about 2016, when other manufacturers started doing electric cars, that we would be very uncompetitive, and that we could probably get there in the end. But I mean, just to give one example, if you're a new manufacturer starting up, small scale, you're paying 30 to 50% more for each component than an established manufacturer. So even your specification might not be better, it's going to cost you 30 or 50% more. And you can't survive doing that.
And that's because they can buy at much larger scale, so they have pricing power.
Exactly. They've been in the market for ages. They know the suppliers. They've got a reasonable price. But, we were the new kid on the block, and we were probably being taken advantage of on cost. And we've got all the costs of tooling, which I talked about, setting up the factory, building a paint plant, all those sort of things. So it's a big investment, and it would have taken us many, many years to get it back. Stopping it was really difficult. We realized we had to stop it, or were best advised to stop it. And very sadly, we had to tell everybody involved in the project that we were stopping it. And we'd spent £500 million, about $700 million on it. And it didn't really teach us that much. We didn't really get much from it, except some very talented people who we'd recruited to do the car project, who came into the existing business with us. So the benefit from our $700 million was some wonderful people and refocusing on our main business.
When you make that big of an investment, when you go after that big of a category, you put that much time and money into it, and then you pull the plug on it, how do you explain that to your investors? How do you explain that to your internal stakeholders? What is that process like at Dyson?
Well, I'm the investor, so I'm talking to myself, so I don't have to explain things to investors. I do have to explain things to the workforce. And we had to explain the commercial reality, that it would be very unlikely in the short term that we'll make any money from it. We might in the long term, but to struggle through to the long term making losses is not a good thing to do. And they understood that. And actually, the world was looking for electric car engineers. So those who wanted to go off and continue in cars went off and continued happily in cars. Whereas those who wanted to stay with us stayed with us. But it's a sad moment. And, as you say, it's not just the money. It's the hard work, all the emotion, all the enthusiasm, all the long hours that have gone into developing it. But, that's what our life is. Our life's a risky life. We spend a lot of money developing new technology. It can take years and years. We've been developing new battery technology for 10 years, and we're still not on the market with it. These are big, big investments, which are risky investments. And innovation is a risky business, which is why sometimes we have to charge more than people would like to pay for what we sell. And of course, plagiarists just pick up on all that. They're not taking the risk. They're not spending all those years and investing all those years in developing technology. They just grab it.
You said, or at least I understood you to be saying, that there weren't a lot of lessons learned from the car experiment. I have to imagine that there's at least more data for you to assess when to make a big investment going after a new market, particularly if you're going to have to spend enormously to get into it. I'm curious what those takeaways were and what kind of process you have to formalize. I mean, is there a formal process for saying a postmortem in terms of what can we learn from this so that we avoid some of these pitfalls going forward and we optimize our process?
I don't think we did anything wrong. The only thing we did wrong probably was making the decision to go in the first place. But then circumstances changed. When we set out to do it, there was wonderful Tesla, but nobody else. We felt the industry was wrong about that. But of course, circumstances changed. And we probably should have stopped the moment Dieselgate happened and we saw what the big car manufacturers were doing. We probably should have stopped at that point. But we carried on for another 2 years and then realized that our worst fears were being realized and that we should stop it. But you can't really learn anything from these experiences because things that happen in the future have different circumstances. I mean, I've never believed that experience helps anything. I prefer naivety. And it sounds ageist, but I try to employ young people who are unafraid of failure, unafraid of trying something new, and unafraid of pioneering. Experienced people always know why you shouldn't do something. I want people who don't really have that problem, who in their naivety, question things and want to do things differently. My point is that sort of experience doesn't help you for the future because next time the circumstances are going to be completely different.
There's an inherent tension in this, right? Because it's essential that you have people with the right experience and expertise in understanding how things work, how to build things, and yet you want that naivete. So how do you balance the need for specialized expertise with that outsider's perspective and the fearlessness of youth or lack of attachment to the way things have historically been done in a certain industry?
Yes, now you're making a very good point. You need that mixture, but you need a lot more of the naivety and very little of the experience. If you have too many experienced people, the sort of general mood is one of doing things in the ordinary, expected way. But what you need is an experienced person, for example, running your manufacturing operation who's done that before. But all the people supporting him, hopefully, would be people for whom this was the first time. They're pioneering. Then they're pushing that person to do things differently and not be afraid of doing things differently.
I'm curious how your own needs inform the decision to invest in and launch the Dyson Institute. Could you share a little bit about that part of this journey?
Yes, no, that's quite a long journey, but I'd been going to every new government minister of education saying we need more engineers and we need more engineers. And we do need more engineers to solve all the problems, but also because products now are much more complex than they were 30 years ago. You have AI now, you have software, you have electronics, you've got to use fewer materials, you've got to make things smaller, you've got to consider the environment and so on and so on. So you need 5 or 6 times the number of engineers now to do a product than you did 30 years ago. So I've been badgering the government to do something about education getting exciting and getting more people into education and science. And of course, as governments, they've done nothing. So finally, about 8 years ago, I went again to the new minister. And he said, well, do your own university. If you're so worried about it, do your own university. I said, I can't. And he said, well, I'm going to change the law. So he changed. So we said, I thought it was a brilliant idea to have our own university. And he changed the law. In 2017, we set up our own new university and took in our first intake of 45 school children. 1 or 2 of them even 17. And they work, we pay them. They have a contract of employment with us. We pay them. In fact, I always joke that they're the only students who pay tax and are net contributors to the state. They work 3 days a week with our scientists and engineers and we teach them for the other 2 days. And they're a wonderfully enthusiastic lot. They are naive and question our experienced engineers, which is exactly what I wanted. They invent things. They have a wonderful time, and they're inspired to do their academic studies. So several of them, and by the way, we have a higher percentage of first-class honours than any other British university. We're something like 10 times oversubscribed. And several of the students have written to me afterwards saying I would never have got a first-class honours if I hadn't had to work with other people and understand the need to learn the theory. And in our university, we have our undergraduates are being taught by practitioners, not by academics. Mm-hmm. And when they qualify after their 4-year course, then they do a 47-week year. They don't do an academic year. And their skill and ability is that of someone who is a graduate who's been with us for 5 years. So they start 5 years ahead of any other graduate. And we pay them for that. So they're very well paid.
As we think about the need to reimagine education globally, do you view this as a scalable model?
I do, yes. I mean, there's a cost to it. It costs us, but I think we get back more than it costs us. And I'm simply horrified by the debt that students have to take on now for their living accommodation and their fees. It's completely wrong to me that at that stage in your life you should leave university owing £60,000, $90,000, whatever it is, as you start to make your way in life. It's wrong. So I think I found a way to stop that. And I think almost any company or organization could have their own university. I have to say, I mean, one of the reasons I thought it was a good idea is that we have a very broad range of engineering, everything from software, AI, through to motor technology, battery technology, ordinary mechanics, electric motors, electric turbines. So it's a very broad range of engineering. I mean, not all companies have as broad a range and can offer that sort of breadth of experience, but we can do that. And we have operations in Singapore and Malaysia and the Philippines, so that people can get overseas experience. So it may not be right for every company, but there are companies who are in our position who could do it.
We only have a couple minutes left before I know you have to go, and I want to hopefully revisit this with you. I want to think about a capsule on scaling new ideas in education. So perhaps we can have a follow up on that. In a culture of invention feels critical for a company like yours. It can't all come from your brain, I imagine. How have you? I appreciate bringing in people who have that outsider's perspective. How have you scaled the culture of innovation so that it's not just you coming up with these product concepts?
Well, I don't come up with any of them now. I've got lots of bright people who come up with the ideas. And indeed, my son has come into the business and he has ideas as well. I think just simply, a lot of people ask me that question, and it's just simply an attitude every day, every minute of the day. When someone has an idea, you say, that's interesting. Why don't you go and work on it? As opposed to saying, well, that might not work. So if you suggest negativity, then that spreads. But if you have enthusiasm all the time for new ideas, and you're known as a business for fostering and nurturing new ideas, then you tend to gather around you people who do have ideas. So it's an everyday thing. Never being a doubting Thomas, never being cynical. And if an idea is a bad idea, explain carefully and sensitively why it's a bad idea.
And what should we expect next from Dyson? What's the new product that we'll be seeing from you?
That's top secret. But we are working on batteries, so I can tell you that. But what the actual product is top secret.
Batteries for your own products, or will you sell batteries for the broader market to use?
Well, that's a very interesting question. No, batteries for our own products. which is not to say the technology couldn't be used in other things, but we don't want to be a very large manufacturer of batteries. That's not our aim. We want to make the batteries we need.
Well, I had to try to ask the top secret question to
Yes,
try
I
to
know,
see if I could get the answer.
it was a good
there.
try. It was a good try.
I slipped it in and I took the shot.
It was too early in the morning to get an answer.
Yeah, fair enough. James, let's wrap with this. I have to imagine that you are stopped on the street. You are accosted by aspiring inventors everywhere. What's the one piece of advice you make sure to share with them?
I never give advice because you don't know their situation. And in any case, what's happening tomorrow is totally different to today. The one thing I do say is never give up. Because often the very point where you're exhausted, depressed, everything's going wrong, and you want to give up, success is just around the corner. I liken it to running a mile, because I used to be a long-distance runner. And the moment you want to give up is the sort of end of the third lap. Everybody else is exhausted. And that's the moment you should accelerate, because you'll win and get to the finish line.
And your first product had more than 5,000 failures before you got there. So if anyone is a proof point of that, certainly you.
Nothing wrong with failure. Nothing wrong with failure.
Yeah. Provided it comes with lessons. Provided there are takeaways. Especially.
Well, provided you get there in the end.
For that too. Yeah. All right. We know you have to go. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Jeff, very much. Good to speak to you. Very good questions. Thank you.